Unit 731, it's like something straight out of a horror flick written by a wicked mind. A tale of unimaginable cruelty that includes some of the most disturbing human experiments ever performed. But we regret to inform you that this is no twisted fiction. It's all real, and it's one of the darkest chapters in Japan's history. But what exactly went down at Unit 731? Who was the main monster behind the madness? Did they get away with their crimes? And how does it all connect to the US government? It's time to take a walk down the path of history and reveal what they didn't tell you about Unit 731. Unit 731, also known as the Manchu Detachment 731 or Ishii Unit, was responsible for some of the most intense and violent crimes against other humans in recorded history through the use of its inhumane medical experiments. Some so graphic it's hard to believe that it really happened. Led by a depraved doctor and his team, this entire operation was fully backed by the Imperial Japanese Army and even Japanese royalty, encouraging the medical unit to push the limits of the human body, and they would soon find them. Unit 731 was designed with one goal in mind: to create the most advanced and brutal biochemical weapons to ensure the victory of Japan during World War II. The doors of this hell on earth officially opened around 1936. Based in the district of Pingfang, located in Harbin, Manchukuo. Manchukuo is today known as Northeast China. To get some mental geographical maps of where this all took place, this city was Japan's largest puppet state from 1932 to 1945. The Japanese Imperial Army also had branches of this unit spread out all across parts of Japanese-occupied China and Southeast Asia. But we're here to talk about Unit 731, the site where most of the experiments took place. They say all is fair in love and war, but nothing done to these people could even come close to being considered fair. Human experimentation is the stuff of nightmares. Human experimentation involving advanced bioweaponry was truly the stuff of pure horror. Japan's prisoners of war were subjected to heinous tortures. Those who died in agonizing pain on the steel slab of an operating table during failed procedures would be considered the lucky ones. You'll soon understand why. The unwilling subjects were infected with multiple different bacteria, given infections and used as guinea pigs to test chemical weapons, like, for example, anthrax. Nasty diseases have been a plague on mankind since the beginning. The testing of some of those previously stated diseases on the prisoners was used to simulate and study how a disease such as smallpox or cholera might wipe out an enemy troop if set loose upon them. During their containment, prisoners were purposely infected with deadly illnesses, such as the bubonic plague, also known as the Black Death, the pandemic that famously wiped out almost half of Europe from 1346 to 1356, documenting each stage of the illness, seeing how it spread amongst the prisoners exposed, until the prisoners succumbed to the disease, or were simply disposed of with a lethal injection. Bullets also were very much used to aid in dispatch after a subject had fulfilled their use. Somehow, things got even worse. A lot of these prisoners who were infected with diseases had vivisections performed on them. Vivisection being the fancy word for an operation done on a live patient without any sort of anesthetic or pain relief. These people would have their organs removed to study them without the decomposition process of death interfering with results. Other prisoners would have their limbs cut off and then stitched back into a different area of the body from the original amputee site. Observing how the disembodied limb would reattach and begin the healing process, or if there was anything to heal at all. These limbs were often riddled with gangrene, where the affected skin would turn black, becoming necrotic due to a lack of proper circulation or a nasty bacterial infection that rotted away the flesh. Other limbs set to be removed were brutally destroyed first, getting crushed before the medical staff started the process of removing the limb and sewing it back on. While starting out as purely a research unit for biological and chemical weapons of medicine, the Unit 731 team was not satisfied with experimenting with diseases alone, opening up a new wave of ways to torture their victims. Physical weapons were tested on the prisoners, using their bodies as target practice for Army's bayonets, swords, and flamethrowers. The flamethrowers were tested on clothed and naked skin to really cover all the bases. A fairly knowledgeable individual might already have an idea of what might happen to bare skin exposed to insane levels of firepower from an Army-grade flamethrower. But that's what experiments are for, to really make sure. One of the physiologists who worked at Unit 731, Yoshimura Hisato, had a morbid fascination with the way environmental damage could affect the human body, his special interest being cold. Hisato would often dunk his subjects' limbs into buckets filled with freezing cold water until the limb became completely frozen and frostbitten, to to the point that it was reported if the frozen limb was struck with an object, it would sound like a solid plank of wood. Hisato also experimented with treating frostbite by observing how to unthaw a prisoner's limb using various methods, including pouring hot water of various temperatures over the affected limb, exposing the prisoner to fire, or simply leaving the person out to defrost on their own and timing how long it took for the blood to unfreeze. After all of this research, Hisato concluded that the appropriate treatment for frostbite was to dip the affected area in hot water heated to a minimum of 100 degrees Fahrenheit, but not to more than 122 degrees. We wish we could say that was the worst of it, or that there wasn't more to come, but twisted curiosity and endless possibilities led to even more depraved experiments. The limits of the human body were put under enormous stress to see how long they could survive before the body passed away due to strain. Prisoners often were deprived of food and water. To test the durability of the human body, prisoners were dropped onto each other from various heights, or to see how intense G-forces could push the limits, prisoners were spun at immense speeds repeatedly until it became fatal. The average human limit was around 10 to 15 G-forces. Prisoners were shoved into gas chambers and pumped full of nerve gas. Not one prisoner was safe from these experiments, regardless of age or gender. Men, women, and children were subjected to these inhumane conditions and used for experiments. It didn't matter if they had been born yet or not. How could these physicians justify such actions? Doctors are tasked with providing care and support to the sick and injured. That's their job. Well, not these doctors. Their justification boiled down to the nickname they gave prisoners. That's where Maruta comes in, the Japanese word for logs. These prisoners were so dehumanized to the point that none of the staff of Unit 731 saw them as people anymore. The Imperial Army was in agreement. Their paper-thin justification was the byproduct of a deeply rooted case of the belief that because these people weren't Japanese, they weren't even people. Unsurprisingly, not a single person who was subjected to these experiments survived Dr. Shiro Ishii and his team of Unit 731. Japanese researchers and soldiers alike were ordered to exterminate anyone who might have still been alive when word spread that surrender was on the cards for Japan. The unit itself was responsible for at least 14,000 recorded deaths during the years 1936 to 1945. It might come as no surprise that the Japanese government destroyed a lot of the research after Japan's surrender in a desperate attempt to sweep what had happened under the rug before they could be captured and tried as war criminals by Allied forces. After the surrender, you might be wondering what was in store for the fate of Ishii. A genuine war criminal of such nature surely must have been given appropriate punishment. That's where the US government comes in. These actions changed the course of history as we know it and saw a massive injustice for all victims of Unit 731. We're getting ahead of ourselves. Let's explain. 1946 saw the arrest of the notorious Dr. Ishii by US forces, with cries from the Soviets to have him severely punished for his actions, wanting to try him and any of his fellow captive Unit 731 officers as nothing short of disturbed war criminals. The US government had a proposition for the medical madman instead. A deal was made between the US government and Ishii. The doctor was to hand over all the research in exchange for total immunity. In other words, Ishii wouldn't be charged as a war criminal at all, despite leading the charge against one of the most appalling acts committed against other people. In a surprise twist, along with being granted complete immunity, Ishii was offered a job working alongside the United States military forces, teaching them all about what he was still passionate about all those years later: bioweaponry and the research conducted in Unit 731. One of his jobs provided by the US military was his aid in the United States' biological weapons program, which was established in 1943, but could always use more hands-on experience for the job. For this, Ishii was sent over to Korea during the Korean War. This wasn't an unusual process after the war, Ishii's treatment striking a resemblance to the actions of Operation Paperclip, a top-secret US military operation that involved the capture and immunity of Nazi soldiers in exchange for information, fully pardoning their war crimes and allowing them to live normal lives. That definitely sounds familiar. Upon return to Japan, Ishii opened up a free clinic where he would live out the remainder of his life before eventually succumbing to throat cancer in 1959 at the age of 67. His funeral was led by his right hand from Unit 731, Misaji Kitano. It must be true what they say, those who slay together, stay together. Now check out how they finally caught the Nazi butcher, or watch this video instead.